Hey everybody, it's your friendly neighborhood game master Zach Call here. Checking out the new version of Daggerheart. I didn't have really like enough time to crunch like 1.3, but I did have a reaction and read through of 1.2. This is going to be shorter, I think, because I'm not just going to read through everything. I'm going to only be looking at the game master materials. I'm not going to be looking at the any of the PC, like the player character, cards, abilities, that kind of stuff. I'm sure those things have been tweaked. We're about to find out. I have not looked at this at all. We're going to start with the change log and then we'll kind of go from there. It's now available on daggerheart.com or through DriveThruRPG. You can get a link to both of those down in the description, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so some universal changes. We reorganized and clarified the rules. Okay, not super specific, but good. Advantage reverted to previous D6 advantage, disadvantage. Oh, do I have, let me recall what 3 did. So in 1.3, disadvantage, now just they got an additional hope die, and then disadvantage had them roll an additional hope die and take the lowest option. We've gone back to D6 that you add or subtract. They must have been, I feel like 1.3 just came out maybe like less than a month ago. So they must have gotten some pretty quick feedback from folks that they didn't enjoy the change. Yeah, right at a month. 1.3 was released on April 9th. Today is May 7th. So basically 4 weeks later, immediate reaction, but folks didn't like the additional hope die. I also think like there was nothing else using an addition, like a third hope die. I don't think so. It meant that like if you're putting a dice kit together that you had to have a third D12 that only got used occasionally, which I agree that I think going back to D6 as a plus and minus as opposed to kind of taking 5e D&D 5e's roll two die, take the lowest. I like this better. Looks like we've cleared and then action rolls. Further guidance on when an action roll should be made. Yeah, I've just seen a lot of confusion around what is and what isn't an action roll, just because moves aren't super clearly defined. So cool that we're just getting some additional guidance. We'll definitely look at those and see. So we've clarified some text in both rulings over rules and flavoring your game. I wish these came with almost like a plus minus, like a dev doc. I have a development background, like computer, like web development. I'm used to seeing like a diff document of like being able to see like what was added, what was subtracted. I kind of wish I had that without having to like pull up 1.3 going like side to side. I might, but we'll see. Ancestries have been adjusted. Flavor and mechanics have been adjusted. Ancestries now have 2 features, and then mixed ancestries allow you to mix and match those features. Okay. Some minor thresholds have gone up. I think because they changed how thresholds and damage worked in 1.3, which is a good move, but everybody had minor threshold of 1, which felt kind of bad for certain classes that didn't really make sense in the fiction. So Guardian now has a minor threshold of 3. Warrior and Seraph have a minor threshold of 2. And now your minor threshold can be raised as a leveling up option. Great. Love it. Bard changed the rally feature. If you watch my 1.2 video, I was kind of confused about the Bard rally. I think feedback has been that it's kind of not extremely powerful for like a main class feature. So I'm looking forward to seeing what that looks like. I guess I might have to look at class abilities. Druid, why did this get indented? Added guidance for beast form, and then also modified the beast form feature. Guardian, modified background questions. Okay, increased damage threshold, rebalanced evasion, and then modified unstoppable. I don't know features off the top of my dome by name, so we'll kind of see what happens. Ranger, modified the companion sheet. Cool. Rogue, rebalanced evasion. Yeah, I have a feeling evasion was probably too OP. Overpowered. Seraph, increased the minor threshold. Yep. Warrior, modified attack of opportunity and increased minor threshold. Okay, so we got that. Yeah, they kind of changed up how they were going to do gold. And I really liked how it was kind of abstracted away in 1.2. I think they got feedback that people didn't understand abstract wealth very well, and so they went specific. Now in 1.4, it is an optional rule to use coins instead of part of the standard denomination. So we'll look and see. I'm assuming that means that by default, you use the 1.2 rules, but the 1.3 rules with coins is an option if your table needs more specificity. General rules added end of the scene guidance and some guidance around ongoing effects. The rules around domain cards got moved from chapter 1 to chapter 2. I think that's good. I think domain cards, obviously when creating a character, you need to know, like prepping for an adventure, but at the same time, like talking about your maxes and stuff, which you aren't going to hit ever in character creation. You only ever hit at like level 4 or 5. I can't remember off the top of my head. I think that makes sense to move into a different chapter than like level 1 character creation. Downtime. Clarified that you can use the same downtime move twice during rest. Action tracker, actions, adding section, clarifying what counts as an action. I think a lot of folks, probably the action tracker and Daggerheart's what would you call, like the way initiative works has probably been one of the most confusing parts for folks who have never played anything other than D&D 5e. So I think that, I think it's smart for them just to be really clear, create a lot of clarity. Like you probably have to over explain, but that's not a bad thing as long as we're not bumping up against a lot of like a page limit and having to ditch new things for over explained content. Level up. We've changed level up options for all classes. The highlights include proficiency now increasing with tier at levels 2, 5, and 7, and a minor threshold increase returning as an option. Unarmored, clarified rules for unarmored characters, and then rebalanced all armor, did some reorganization, significant individual changes. It looks like it actually just have been like completely, like a lot of changes. I don't know the specifics of it. I don't really care about item and equipment balance. Like that's not what I'm looking for necessarily at this point, because that stuff is kind of easy, not a huge deal. More interested in like the base, how the game plays out and functions. Equipment obviously plays a pretty big role in that, but I don't know. It just seems less important to me. So, okay, for the GMs, they've added an optional rule that allows GMs to roll a crit success on attacks. I like that rule. I think it's good. In example GM moves, added an option for the GM to gain fear when a PC rolls with fear. Clarified that you can end a temporary condition or effect as a GM move or by spending an action token on the action tracker. Okay. Added a section on running NPCs. That's good. Guidance on falling damage. Cool. Added guidance on TPKs and under character death. Okay. Interesting that came up. If you're caught up with campaign 3 of Critical Role, I won't spoil anything like really specific, but if you don't want to know anything, skip ahead 10 seconds. It's interesting that they're adding in guidance on TPKs coming off the heels of episode 90, where they almost suffered a TPK. Then adversaries and environments, I'll be honest, I haven't read chapter 4. I haven't been able to run. I had multiple sessions planned, and then life really got in the way with me the past couple months. So I haven't actually had to run anything, so I haven't looked at adversaries and environments, so I won't know anything different. Added some new environments and some guidance on using and scaling environments. That's no changes to chapters 5 or 6, and then I would assuming all the cards got updated based on the ruling, like the rules that were. Let's jump in. What should we look at? They don't have the ancestries actually listed out here, so won't see the thing. Let's look at evasion, since a couple of classes had their evasion ability adjusted, which I'm assuming was an adjustment to their base evasion score. So an evasion score reflects how hard it is for your enemies to hit you. Your class's starting evasion score appears right beneath the evasion field on your sheet. Record this in the evasion field. When an enemy makes an attack against your character, the GM rolls against your evasion score to see if they're successful. Each character's evasion may look different within the narrative. A wizard may avoid blows by shimmering arcane shields, by batting away an adversary's spells, while a ranger nimbly dodges out of the way of blows. Warrior unpleasant makes a parries, blocks, and dodges. So evasion is similar to an AC in 5e. It is essentially the difficulty that an opponent has to roll to be hit. You then have hit points, or an abstract reflection of your fortitude and ability to take hits, both from blade and magic. Stress points reflect your ability to withstand the pressures of dangerous situations and mental strain. You can describe hit points and stress points as you wish, but they generally represent your character's ability to get knocked down and keep coming back up. The fewer marks you have on these tracks, essentially, the better. You have a damage threshold indicating how much damage you can endure before marking each hit point. You find your starting damage thresholds on your character sheet, record the numbers in the corresponding fields, then you'll learn how it works. So one thing I've seen, kind of fear got kind of adjusted, but it says here, GM If you roll with fear, the GM records in their notes. They can spend later. I was just saying this in my live read through of the Star Trek Adventures 2nd edition quick start. I wish they really like referred to hope and fear as like token pools. Like, I feel like not record this in their notes. I feel like they should explicitly say like the GM adds 1 fear to their fear pool and can later spend that fear on certain effects. And then sometimes a fear roll also introduces other complications into a scene, even if you succeed. Like, hope and fear as like this meta economy is fulfilling the same function as momentum and threat in Star Trek Adventures and other 2D20 system games. And I just really I almost wish Daggerheart would just completely do everything that momentum and threat does in those games. And one thing I mentioned in that video is like, I wonder how it would affect the balance of the game if hope was a party resource that everybody contributed to and could pull from instead of a individual PC resource. And so instead of everybody having their own individual hope pool, there is a party hope pool and a threat or in a fear pool managed by the GM. Now, maybe they just don't want to they don't want to steal from 2D20 entirely, and they like the changes that they've made. But I just wonder what that would play like. It might even be something I mess around with after the game launches. This is all just the general rules. Okay, so we can kind of see here that I'm trying to see where they were talking about proficiency adjusted. At level 2, it's at the very top of the level up cards. At level 2, take an additional experience and increase your proficiency by 1. Then again at level 5, you can take an additional experience. You clear all marks on character traits and then increase proficiency by 1. Then again at level 8. And I believe if proficiency still works the same as it did at 1.2, it basically is like adding die to your damage rolls. It doesn't add to your to hit because all that's based on like your hope and fear die. Let's look at Bard Rally. So once per session, describe how you rally the party as they head into the fray. Then give yourself and each of your allies a d6 rally die. Anyone with a rally die can spend it to roll it, adding the result to an action roll, reaction roll, or damage roll. We're clearing stress equal to the rally die result. That's big, really big. And then at the end of each session, all unspent rally dice are cleared. So basically, just by having a bard in your party, like obviously this is a fiction first game, they want you to describe, but it doesn't cost you anything. You don't do anything with it. It is a passive ability that just happens at a session, like beginning of a session. Yeah, I guess it happens anytime once per session and then at the end of a session. So I guess narratively, if it doesn't make sense that if you end it on a cliffhanger, you can't. It's not like it just happens by automatically. You still have to do it and say, I'm going to use my rally ability. But then everybody, including yourself, gets a D6. And that's, essentially giving yourself advantage on any roll, but honestly, I'd be using it to clear stress. If stress is still being used to like power class abilities, like you're basically getting yourself a free way to heal up and de-stress and use your abilities more and more, like take that kind of stuff, take those risks. Okay. I'm not going to read through all the others just because I don't remember, and there will be I'm sure there are other YouTubers, content creators out there who know the system better, or will take the time to like do a side-by-side that's more in-depth than the changelog. We can look at ancestries. So we'll just look at the features. So now on a clank, you get both purposeful design and efficient. Decide who you were created by and for what purpose, and then you choose an experience you have that reflects it and increases it by 1. And then whenever you take a short rest, you can substitute a long rest move for one of your short rest moves. That's being able to take a long rest move during a short, like as one of your short rest moves. Then the demon, fearless. When you roll with fear, you can mark 2 stress to make it a roll with hope instead. I like that a lot. Very cool ability. Dread visage. You have advantage on rolls to intimidate a hostile target. Also cool. I skip. No, this was just art. Dracona. Elemental breath, you pick an element. You can use this breath against a target or group of targets within very close range, treating it as an instinct weapon that deals D8 magic damage using your proficiency. So scales up, like the dice scales up every time, like when you hit levels 2, 5, and 8. And then you get an additional armor score +1. Dwarf, you can spend 3 hope to have incoming physical damage. Tight. Big cost, but definitely useful. Thick Skin, whenever you permanently increase your proficiency, also increase your minor threshold by the same amount. So those in combo are really powerful. I really like that Ancestries and Daggerheart don't have like an impact on attributes. These features in the combos that they are really like leaning you into a certain type of character. That's not necessarily to say that like you couldn't play a sorcerer or wizard. It's just that like they benefit from also being kind of more beefy, able to resist more damage than others, which is really cool. And I think it does speak to Ancestries being different without having to like put actual like +1s, -1s that like say they're all intelligent. No, but every dwarf is just thicker skin and they are beefier and have more fortitude. I think that's cool. Elves, you can take an extra downtime move during a rest. Quick reactions, you can mark a stress to take advantage on a reaction roll. Love that. I'm gonna like any feature that allows you to willingly take stress to do things. I like the mechanic of giving up something in return for something special, especially a resource that you kind of have to manage because you can opt into it, but it's also a target, something other people like opponents can target. I think it's great. Fairies, you have wings, you can fly. While flying, you can mark a stress before an adversary's attack roll to increase your evasion by 2. It's interesting they color coded that. I haven't seen that before. Maybe are they saying that's new? Because I was under an impression Ancestry's got a second ability, which I'm assuming is new. Luckbender, once per session, after you or an ally in close range make an action roll, you spend 3 hope to re-roll the duality dice, and you have to take the new result. Fawn, you can easily leap up to close range across gaps or chasms without making an agility roll. Circumstantial. So I hope kick, the second one is good. On a successful melee attack, you can mark a stress to kick yourself off of the target, adding 2d6 to the damage and pushing either them or yourself out of melee range. Yep, it's good. They're both they're both focused on the things that make Fawn special, which is their goat, lower body, and legs. One is pretty circumstantial, but totally makes sense in the fiction of playing a fawn type character. And then the other one is like at low levels is good, less so at higher levels, and it doesn't scale with proficiency. I'd be interested to see if they'd be willing to let it, or if are there ancestry domain cards past character creation that you can take? If so, I could see maybe Kick getting an upgrade that it does scale with proficiency, which would be cool. Furbolgs, natural calm, whenever you should mark a stress, roll a d6. On a result of 6, don't mark it. So a 18% chance. Yeah, like a 18% chance of just not marking a stress. Kind of slows down play a little bit. Like the player needs to be on top of it and remember to do it and try to keep things moving quickly. I would hate for a player to be like at the beginning of their turn, oh, I did X and I forgot to use my natural calm ability. Can I roll? Okay. It's a thing to remember, which I don't love, but I guess most of these are. Like, I can't complain about natural calm if Kick is also there. I guess I just think marking a stress happens more often than you usually making a successful melee attack, but could be wrong. Whenever you succeed on an agility roll to move from far or very far range into melee with one or more targets, mark a stress to deal 1d12 physical damage to all targets. What does that mean? How do I pick targets? Or I guess to move into melee because I guess you have to declare where you're going and who you're moving into melee with. And so if there's multiple targets there that you're moving into melee with, you can damage them all with physical. Took me a second. Fungal. I remember this one, like I did not like the fungal network feature just because it seemed wildly up to the GM and was going to play different at almost every table, at least 1.2. So in Fungal Network, you can make an instinct roll difficulty of 12 to speak with others of your ancestry across any distance using your mycelial array. But then Death Connection, while touching a corpse that died recently, you can mark a stress to extract one memory related to a specific emotion or sensation. I still don't love these, and I could see certain GMs probably not wanting a PC to play a fungal, even though they're very cool aesthetically. Those features, though, are just so GM dependent as opposed to just being do X, then Y happens and it's really explicit. These are very like up to the GM, which is fine for a fiction game. I just see like some tables, if you're playing with strangers, like playing in a convention setting, what have you, I could see these just be kind of one of the more frustrating ancestry features to have to manage as a GM. Galapa, shell protection, you add your proficiency to your armor score. Love that. Slow and steady during combat, you can make an attack roll with advantage by placing an additional token on the action tracker. So give yourself advantage on an attack roll, but you're giving the GM 2 action tokens really for like the price of 1 just to give yourself advantage. Idea being it's taking you so like you're doing it slowly and steadily to the point where it almost takes up the time of 2 actions, I guess. That's kind of where we're going. Interesting. I don't know if that trade-off is worth it. Unless advantage is really rare. I don't remember it coming up a ton. And the math is smaller. So getting a D6, I think in the fiction, it's very cool mechanically. It's a little giant's endurance. Gain an additional hit point slot at character creation to just get an extra hit point. Reach, when you wield a melee weapon, its range increases very close. I love that. So many cool builds with that in mind. Really, really cool. And I think fits what you want the fantasy of playing a giant. Because this ain't like you're not like a half giant or whatever. You are a giant. 7.5, 8 feet tall. Absolutely should have a wider reach than others. There's a goblin. Once per short rest, mark a stress to make an adversary reroll an attack against you or an ally within very close range of you. Okay, so like you're just attuned to danger, maybe with your big ears, and you're like warned. I don't love the idea of rerolling. That implies, I think they need to call out whether this is reroll implies that it happens like. I think they need to say explicitly whether this can happen after the roll and like whether the GM has determined if it's successful or unsuccessful, or say after the die is rolled but before like the result is announced or whatever. And I kind of wish it was disadvantage over reroll for that reason, because it's a little confusing. Kind of wish it was a disadvantage. Like you see someone attacking, you shout, it's happening, but you impose disadvantage, as opposed to the attack happening and then you say, I want to use my danger sense feature. Oh, okay, well then I'll re-roll it. I don't really love that. I don't think it makes sense fiction wise. If we're going to be fiction first, that to me, that isn't explained in a way that it makes me understand it. Sure-footed, ignore disadvantage on agility rolls. That's cool. Can be very good, especially in I haven't looked at the environment stat blocks, but I'm assuming things like difficult terrain would impose disadvantage on things like agility rolls, possibly. Just being able to ignore that and others is cool. So halflings, youthful spirit, at the beginning of each section, everybody gets an additional hope. It doesn't say including yourself. It just says everyone in your party. That should mean you, but I think they should explicitly say including yourself, similar to what they do in the Bard Rally feature. Little lucky. When you roll a 1 on your hope die, you can re-roll it. And you have to take the new result. Every time, reduce the chance of rolling, because isn't that a critical, doesn't something bad happen when you roll a 1 on one of your d12s? Is there a critical failure? Because if it's a critical success if you roll the same number, I guess maybe there isn't a crit failure. That seems really good. That all together just seems very good. I feel like every party would want to have a halfling, because getting an extra hope is pretty crazy. I know you're supposed to be getting hope a lot, but being able to start the session with hope up is great. So humans, you get an additional stress slot at character creation. And then if you fail a roll that utilized one of your experiences, you can mark a stress to reroll, and you must take the new result. For some reason, I don't mind this type of reroll feature. Is that crazy? Am I being hypocritical immediately after not liking danger sense on goblin? I think to me, because this is happening all internally, I can see the I can see a human initially failing for a second and then remembering this experience or kind of calling on this experience internally and being able to then re-roll and potentially overcome it. Where danger sense to me, because it's this external thing that something else is happening, A reroll for yourself, I don't like the reroll, the fact that it includes an ally. Does that make sense? Maybe I'm thinking about it too much. Katari, when you make an agility roll, you can mark a stress to reroll your hope die, and you take the new result on an agility. Yeah, that's cool. Then retracting claws, you can make an agility roll to scratch a target in melee range. On a success, they become vulnerable. Interesting. I kind of like that it's just not damage. Like, vulnerable is good. Like, being able to give that status to a opponent is great. Then orcs, when you use armor, roll a d6 roll a number of d6 equal to the armor slots you should mark. For every result of 6, don't mark an armor slot. When does that happen? Oh, no, just when you use armor. Sorry, I was thinking about like when you put it on. No. In combat, if you're gonna use your armor to reduce damage, instead roll d6s equal to the armor slots you would mark, and then if you have a 18% chance of just not having to mark that armor slot. Cool. Like it. Took me a second just because I'm not used to all this. And I kind of wish use armor was like capitalized and bolded or something like that to be like, hey, this is like a thing you do, not just because to me, when you use armor, like I use armor all day, every day. Very rarely am I like forcing to narrate. So I was like, would I use armor? But no, when you capital U, use capital A, armor. And then Tusk, after making a successful melee attack, you can mark a stress to also gore the target with your Tusk, adding a d6 to the damage roll. A little worse than other ancestry features with like natural features that can do damage. Like retracting claws, it doesn't require you to have already hit successfully, make a roll when you want to in melee range, and it doesn't cost a stress. For orcs, I guess the benefit is you don't have to roll to do an extra d6. I guess it's just basically if you've already hit, you can trade one stress for an additional d6. Good maybe at some levels, and then it's going to be bad at others. But maybe that fits with like orc tusks. Maybe that's like, those aren't some things that are getting better, or even necessarily you getting stronger would make you better at using your tusks for damage. Just kind of a little thing. So maybe it makes sense. Ribbit, amphibious, you can breathe and move underwater just as easily as on land. Long tongue, you can use your long tongue to grab onto things close to you. You can also mark a stress to unleash it as a finesse close weapon that does d12 physical damage. That's a lot of damage. Okay, so I like long tongue if the GM and me are allowed to rule that grabbing onto things means I can pull myself to them and not just pull the thing I grabbed close to me. Does that make sense? Like, I would almost want to use it as like, yes, of course, like a normal frog thing of like eating something. I would also want to use it like grab onto a post and like pull myself in that direction without having to use movement. That's not explicitly described here and kind of makes me think it's not what the designers are intending. And then that's it feels like a lot of damage for like a little tongue hit. I don't know. I would almost prefer like the movement over a like what seems to be a very powerful, like I don't like that long tongue. It's similar to orc. You're trading a stress for it. They both automatically hit. Orc tusk though is much worse because you have to pair it after a successful melee attack. You can't just do it whenever. It also does only 1d6 damage that does not scale. Now maybe, and it's in melee, where long tongue is close. Maybe the intention here is that it doesn't automatically succeed, that like you're making a finesse close weapon attack. So you have to roll a finesse attack to see if it hits, and then it does d12 scaling. I'd still rather have that than orc tusks. Advantage on agility rolls involve balancing and climbing. I think it should be similar to Fawn. They can leap up to close range across gaps and chasms without making an agility roll. I think Simia should just be able to, you can balance and climb without having to make a roll. Oh, but you get +1 evasion. Okay. Those things are balanced. I think that's balanced. I think they're balanced against each other. Never mind. Cool. And then mixed ancestry. Write down how your goblin or your character identifies itself, whether it could be goblin - orc or just goblin with orc in their lineage, or a name you choose like Toothling. And then you can pick 2 features from any combination of ancestries you're descended from, or you can work together to create your own. I don't think communities got changed, so I'm just going to keep it moving. And we're approaching past half an hour on this. So since Daggerheart relies on a flexible back and forth, combat has no initiative order, no rounds, and no distinct number of actions you can take on your turn. Instead, fights play out narratively, moment to moment, just like non-combat scenes. This provides the players opportunities to team up together in their tactics, respond appropriately to narrative changes in the scene, not be locked into violence once the first strike happens. In combat scenarios have the potential to last more than a few rolls, or in any scene where moment-to-moment gameplay becomes important to track, use the action tracker. PCs aren't the only ones who make moves. The GM can make a GM move at nearly any time. Most commonly when a PC rolls with fear or fails an action roll. GM moves typically escalate the scene in exciting and dangerous ways. Many GM rules don't require spending any resources, but the GM spends action tokens to activate adversaries in battle. So like kind of trading off, okay, the party, you guys decided to take you made 3 action rolls before you gave up the initiative. So now I can activate that, as a GM can activate 3 different adversaries. Then they use their fear to like turn on more powerful moves, like a fear move. Got the duality dice. So when you roll with hope, when it happens on an action roll, mark one of the hope slots on your character sheet up to a maximum of 6. And then when you roll with fear, if it happens on an action roll, even if you succeed, there are consequences or complications that come from it. Why don't they just say gives a fear? Does it not just give a fear? So you can still use a help an ally utilize an experience or activate a hope feature by spending hope. Rolling with fear, so using fear, page 95. Rolling with fear doesn't mean your action roll failed, but you'll face some type of complication. For example, you might only learn partial information. You might face a strike from the enemy you just attacked or encounter an unexpected danger. If you also failed on the action where you rolled fear, you'll instead face a major consequence or complication. When you roll with fear, you don't record it on the character sheet. Instead, the GM makes a move to reflect the complications of your fear roll. The move might immediately affect the scene, but the GM sometimes uses that move to instead collect a fear token. The GM can later spend these stored fear tokens on effects such as powering big adversary and environment moves. Okay, this I'm drawing parallels to what I know, and I think it's maybe helpful to talk about like other game systems that do these things. So like it's not a completely novel idea, which is not a negative on it. Like there's nothing new under the sun. So in 2D20, which I've already talked about, momentum and threat, very, very similar to hope and fear. Difference being how they're generated. The dice work differently, understandable. Also, momentum PC resource is a group pool everybody contributes to and everybody can pull from to use, as opposed to an individual player resource. Rolling with fear now kind of works like rolling a complication in the 2D20 system, where basically the GM narrates a complication to whatever the PC was attempting to do. Or if the GM doesn't want to introduce a complication, or more than likely can't think of a narratively appropriate one quickly without slowing the game down, they instead opt to simply take a fear token. All right, so taking a look at damage thresholds, because I know this changed a lot since 1.2. When the GM tells you to take damage, compare that number to your thresholds and mark it depending on the tier. If it's over your severe damage threshold, you mark 3 hit points. If it's over your major damage and under your severe damage, it's 2. It's over your minor damage, you mark 1. And any damage that is below your minor threshold, you just mark no HP. This used to then get converted into stress, and I think they just removed that because it feels bad to still be marking something if damage is under your damage threshold. Does mean all the damage thresholds got adjusted down. Only 3, I think all of them were 1, which I think felt bad for the fully armored, like the more tanky classes. So they just got adjusted on 1.4, where like I think it's the champion that's 3, and the seraph and somebody else, as it starts with 2. You can increase your minor thresholds at level up. There's a couple of ancestries, and I'm sure there's probably some other things that can increase your minor threshold. That's what I would be doing. I'd be prioritizing moving my minor threshold, I think, unless there seems to be a common number that gets rolled in between minor and major, where if I move my major up, I'm avoiding. Then if you ever mark your final available hit point, you immediately make a death move. You can clear your hit points during downtime, and then you can also, there's an optional rule for massive thresholds, which is 4 hit points, which I think is cool. You're in trouble if you're dealt 36 damage, as this example illustrates, but I think it might make sense. I might make it double your severe damage threshold. Like it should be a lot. But at the same time, if you get hit with a lot of damage, you should suffer more than just 3 hit points. If it's like if it's over double your severe damage, yeah, I think that makes sense. Then you have stress points. When an effect requires you to mark a stress point, you do so. Whenever you mark your last stress, you become vulnerable until you either clear at least one stress or clear the condition through another means, such as a spell or ability or GM fiat. If you're ever forced to mark a stress point, but you're full, you instead mark a hit point. And then as with hit points, you have the opportunity to clear some stress. And then when you gain levels, you can increase the amount of stress you can withstand. Can you increase your hit points when you level up? Call that out in that section, but maybe. And stress for adversaries. Some adversary actions might require you to mark stress. These actions represent the adversary's ability to demoralize you, exhaust you, or similarly push your physical and mental limits. Then your GM can inflict stress as the complication or consequence of an action, especially when a roll doesn't go as well as it could have. For example, you might mark stress as a complication from having a difficult conversation, clashing swords with a worthy foe, or committing an act of incredible bravery. The GM might also give you the option of marking stress to avoid a different complication. I hope all this is re-listed and put in plain sight for GMs in the next chapter of like, here's all the things that you can do when a character rolls with fear, which I'm assuming is what they're talking about when they say as a consequence or complication of an action. Like, to me, a complication would be you succeeded, but you rolled with fear. And so you're going to get like, you succeeded in that conversation, but it was more difficult than you thought it was going to be. And so you need to mark a point of stress. Where a consequence is like, you failed, you didn't get what you want. I don't know. Maybe you not only did you not, and then maybe if you failed and rolled with fear, not only did you not get what you want, you are going to suffer stress because of like how embarrassed you are that didn't go well, or like you're really bummed out. And then there are certain moves you want to make mark stress. You can't mark stress multiple times on the same feature to increase or repeat its effects. So if an ability lets you mark a stress to add a D8 to a stress roll, you can't mark 3 to add 3D8. And then you can't use a move that requires you to mark stress if you don't have slots to mark, even if that means like you can't optionally take the hit point from your stress track being full in order to use that move. You just can't use it. Action rolls. If you make a move where the outcome's in question and the success or failure of that move is interesting to the story, your move is an action. In these cases, the GM usually calls for an action roll to determine how the moment unfolds. Why would your move be like, why would rolling be anything other than where the outcome is in question and the success of the failure of that move is interesting? So why isn't everything is an action and an action roll, right? Like, I don't really understand what the difference between an action and an action roll is, unless they just want to be able to call them different things for like communication, like lexicurgical reasons. That's not a word, but I came up with it on the fly. You roll your duality dice, 2d12, hope and fate. So the GM asks, you and the GM kind of talk and figure out what the best trait. The GM sets a difficulty for the roll, either openly or privately at their discretion, which is why I think they need to clarify things like opponent rerolls, or even any reroll. Like in the ancestries that we were talking about earlier, like, does this happen after you know if you succeeded or not? Like, can you choose to reroll after you've learned that you failed if the difficulty was private? Or do you have to you could choose to use it after the dice is rolled, but before you know what the result of the action roll is. Decide if any experience or other modifiers apply. Grab any character tokens, advantage, disadvantage. Character tokens are a way to like tell yourself that you have like a +1 or a -1. I haven't seen anything would affect rolls like that. Then you roll the dice, you total the result. I got a 15 with fear, and then you resolve the situation. All this seems... So critical success is when you roll the same number on the duality dice. You gain a hope and clear stress, deal extra damage equal to the maximum value of your damage dice. So you get to roll your damage dice, and then you would take whatever the maximum would be. Did you add that to what you roll, which is crazy. Big swings. On a success with hope, you pull it off well and get what you want, and you gain a hope. On a success with fear, you get what you want, but it comes with a cost or consequence, which is what we were kind of talking about with fear and stress just a minute ago. And then on a failure with fear, things go very poorly. You probably don't get what you want, and there's a major consequence or complication of it. Yeah, I just wish these were a little more defined of like, what's the different, like, how do you measure what the consequence is of a failure with hope, of a failure with fear? Like, what constitutes a major or a not major consequence? Is a major consequence marking a stress, or is that a not major consequence? Is a major consequence always narrative, or does like, can I tell them to mark 2 stress? Can I give them the vulnerable condition? It's just like, I wish these were a little more clear. Again, like, and maybe that's just not this type of game. Like, the game is intended to be up to the narrative. They don't want to prescribe things to the point where players get upset when a GM tries to do something narratively, but they don't have the explicit permission beyond maybe just a call out of GM fiat. Characters can make certain players uncomfortable. So the story is the consequence. I guess this is what, there's no such thing where nothing happens. The fiction should be evolving. So like if you fail, it doesn't just mean you don't get what you want. Like something more interesting has to happen as a consequence. If you fail to pick a lock, it's not just that the door doesn't open. On a failure with hope, it might mean you can hear the rumble of footsteps coming down the hall behind you. The enemies you previously skipped are getting close, and you have to act quickly. On a failure with fear, the door might have been magically warded to keep thieves away, and its arcane alarm triggers. Meanwhile, on a success with fear, you might succeed at unlocking the door, but you're spotted by enemies within. Each GM player has a different level of interest and comfort in this roll-by-roll improvisation. Some groups may prefer a largely predetermined world. For example, the GM could have previously decided that there are 2 guards on patrol, and you roll simply to learn whether you unwittingly run into both of them, whether one rounds the corner but you catch them unawares, or whether you escape both guards without notice. In other groups, the GM might not have decided if any guards exist at all, but after you roll with fear, the GM weaves 2 guards into the story you're creating together. Either approach is okay. You'll likely use a mix of both. Daggerheart shines when each player feels free to affect a story that doesn't exist yet, rather than waiting for a predetermined story to unfold. Part of the game's fun is discovering those unplanned moments together. I agree with all that. Where I struggle is, how do the players know that I didn't have guards planned? They shouldn't know that. Like, to them, there should be a veil there. And that's basically where I land on things like GMs fudging dice, or like fudging HP pools, etc. Like, all that relies, like, the argument is predilected upon the notion that the players know that something was changed, when like there should be no reason for them to know. Like, they don't know how much HP there is, or like, I can't, and like, obviously once I change, or like they discover what the AC or the evasion score of a certain opponent is, you can't change it after the fact. Like, that'd be extremely dumb. Like, unless there was a narrative reason for it, they should never know. In this example, it's like, my players shouldn't know if what I determined was what the story they experienced was predetermined or not. I get what they're trying to say. Daggerheart should be a conversation where the players get to influence, make a decision on what their consequence is. And the GM obviously gets final say, but like is like open dialogue. And it's going to be new for a lot of players. It would be new for my group too. Like, and I'm way more open to it, have a little more experience in it, it would be an adjustment on my part too. Okay, here's some examples. I don't really love, examples are good. Sarah rolls with 3 on the hope, 6 on the fear die, and +2 for agility for a result of 11 with fear. Describes the mage responding quickly to Isabella's maneuver, making an attack roll. If it is successful, so the mage knocks her off the parapet with a blast of magical fire and deals damage. Isabel crashes down to the level below and must find a way back up if she plans to face the mage head on again. Okay, so this is a combat situation. The player failed. Here's my understanding of the rules and what happened in the game. They failed with fear. Because they failed with fear, the initiative was immediately turned over to the GM. The GM is able to activate the mage as an opponent using one of the action tokens on the action tracker that was placed by Sarah, performing her action roll to make an attack roll. Maybe because rolled with fear, the GM decided to immediately spend that fear to give the mage advantage on the attack against Sarah. And so regardless, it made the attack successful against her. Maybe the consequence of her failing with fear is the fact that she was knocked down an entire level below. Could do both. Like, if the GM had fear tokens to spend, they could burn that in addition to failing with fear just being this pretty large narrative consequence that like she's essentially off the map or in a very different zone than she was previously, and is going to need to spend maybe more than one turn to get back to where she wanted to be. Failure with hope. Instead, in this situation, okay, so this is in continuance. Sarah's attempting to move back to where she wants to go, and she succeeds with, this is failure with hope. So rolled an 11, but rolled higher on the hope die than the fear die. 11 isn't enough to make it across safely. So on a failure, the GM then gets to make a move. The GM makes a move narrating that mage sees Isabella coming and makes an attack, which succeeds. Oh no, this is just a retelling, I guess. The mage's blast knocks Isabella off balance, leaving her dangling from the parapet. Her progress stalled and position precarious. Isabella gains a hope, but her friends are still in the line of fire and may need to help Isabella reach with safety. That's a lot. Like, even just her getting like pushed off to the edge feels like a pretty large narrative consequence for failing an attack roll to me. Like, this failure with fear example feels really, really consequential. Failure with hope feels like a little less consequential, but still in the terms of things, pretty consequential. But I guess that's the difference of like, things don't just, nothing happens when you fail, or it's not that nothing happens when you fail. If you miss, things are going to go poorly, which is good from a storytelling perspective. I just think everybody would need to adjust their expectations if they're coming from a like success failure binary game. So in an excess with fear, she rolled a 16, but with fear, so it's a success. GM asks her to describe how she races across the parapet, dodging the mage's blast. After her description, the GM takes over, saying that once Isabella's crossed, she faces her foe head on, blocking them from attacking the rest of the party. But then the mage reaches out with magic and crumbles the parapet behind Isabella, leaving her trapped and unable to move back to safety. But at least the mage isn't attacking her friends, right? Man, again, that feels like a really big consequence for rolling with fear. I think I need to broaden my horizons of what is narratively possible when fear or failure is rolled, because all this seems crazy. Very cinematic. It's just, I'm not used to it. Success with hope, 18 with hope, a success. She immediately gains a hope. Then the GM asks her to describe what it looks like as Isabella races across the parapet and interrupts the mage assault on the party. Since Sarah rolled a success with hope, the GM asks what the players want to do next. That could feel really bad when you have zero control over whether the dice rolls with hope or fear. Like, you can't adjust it, and there's very, very rarely things to let you re-roll or alter one of your duality dice, it seems. So yeah, that's a lot of narrative consequence for something that is completely out of your hands. Like, it feels really bad when you fail a roll in D&D. And like, again, you don't have any control over the dice either there. Your modifiers help with that like success or failure binary state, right? And that's the only thing being measured. Is like, even if you roll really, really low on something, because it takes your modifiers into account always. Like, the only thing I can think of where like you're just doing a straight roll with no modifiers is like death saves, and that narratively makes sense to me. But at least in D&D, when you roll, every time you're checking to see whether you succeed or fail, even though it's that just binary state, which is really boring sometimes, at least whether you succeed or fail is usually determined by some kind of modifier or mechanic that is on your character sheet. You succeeded in this succeed with fear example, maybe because of the 2 you have from agility, but simply because, and with no like zero control on your part, you rolled higher on one die than the other, you're trapped. Like, the mage gets to blast the bridge away, and now you're trapped and the rest of your party can't get to you. I don't know. I don't, that might not be for me. Like, I need to be really careful, I think, and would need to run like some successive one shots with my play group to get us all comfortable and like understanding what's going on before launching into like a campaign with like long-term narrative consequences that we all care about. I wanted to look at proficiency and assumed it would be under damage and rolling damage rolls, but I don't see it. So, let me read. So, gold tracks how much your wealth you have with you. You often spend it on things like items, consumables, equipment. Some campaigns will be more or less focused on gold as a reward. So, talk with your GM about how your game will use gold. There's no set prices in this book for weapons, armor, and loot. Players aren't locked out of adding exciting equipment to their characters simply because they aren't playing a gold-focused campaign. GM determines equipment prices based on the amount of gold given out during your sessions. I think that makes sense. Gold's measured in handfuls, bags, and chests. 10 handfuls equal a bag, 10 bags equal one chest. Oh, I think that's even been more, it's still abstract, but it's even been more simplified than I remember from 1.2. I feel there was like 5 different things it could be, and it wasn't like 10 for 1, 10 for 1. Whenever you've marked off enough slots in a given category, you should reach the next category Instead, mark 1 in that following category and erase all the slots in the current one. For example, if you have 9 handfuls and gain another, you instead just mark a bag and erase all the handfuls. If you have 9 bags and gain another, you mark a chest and erase all bags. If you should ever have more than one chest, you'll need to store some of your gold elsewhere before you can take more. Sweet. Makes sense to me. These values are abstracted so that they don't need to be tracked closely. If you want to tip a coin or a waiter or flip a coin into a well, you typically don't need to worry about tracking it. Agreed. Who gives a rip? Who wants to track that silver that you paid the tavern for your... that's not the kind of fun I'm looking for. Optionally, if your group wants to track gold more granularly, you can add coins as your lowest denomination following the pattern above. 10 coins equals 1 handful. It would suck to like, the GM only ever gives out bags or handfuls, but then you spend 1 coin because narratively you're buying dinner. So you spend a coin, and now all of a sudden you have to get rid of one of those handfuls and start tracking coins separately. It feels bad to me. So short rest, you can pick 2 moves, tend to wounds, clear 1d4 hit points, clear 1d4 stress, clear 1d4 armor, or long rest, 2 moves, tend to all wounds, remove all marked hit points, clear all stress, repair all armor. You can prep, then gain a hope, or work on a project. But remember, was it the Clink, like automaton type ancestry, they get to, instead of doing a short rest, get to do a long rest move in addition to their other short rest move. So like you can prepare to gain a hope and then clear all your stress or clear all your hit points. Crazy. Really good. Very powerful. Do I host or do I read action tracker? So we already read a little bit about it. When the action tracker is in use, your character can still make moves anytime. However, when you use an action, including any move that says use an action or requires an action roll, you must place a character token on the action tracker and resolve the action, ending your move. As a PC, your tokens aren't limited. They're just used to track how many times the GM can activate adversaries. So if you ever run out, just grab more. After you end your move by placing an action token, the GM or another PC might act. Or you might decide to make another move. You and your fellow PCs can still act in any order you like following the narrative, but remember to pass the spotlight around the table to ensure everyone has a chance to act. If another player hasn't placed any tokens on the action tracker recently, consider letting them make a move before you do anything else. Yeah, I think this is the thing people online are discussing the most around initiative and the action tracker, is just that in a lot of settings, you're not going to have, you're going to run into problem players who aren't willing to move, pass the spotlight, allow other people to do things that might always take 2 turns in a row because they can and there's nothing from keeping them. And that's probably true. And it'll be interesting to see the types of community and the types of play that evolves around Daggerheart when it comes out, especially around conventions. Some things get different, rulings change a little bit in order to facilitate convention play because you're playing with strangers and you never know the type of player that you're going to run into, and you often don't have time to run a session 0 at a convention, and you're gonna have people that don't want to waste the time that sometimes you're paying for at a convention to have a session 0, which means you need some restrictions. And what I've seen from the community is to not use different colored tokens for each player, kind of have that illustrated here, which I think is a good idea, so that everybody can kind of just see, it doesn't matter, but kind of does matter. And using different colored tokens lets you kind of see in since the GM last did something. And it does mean the GM has to interject a little bit more and be like, hey, player 4, you haven't done anything yet, and everybody else has already taken 2 actions out. I don't see a token from you on the action tracker. What would you like to do next? The GM has to interject, and that can be awkward socially. Shouldn't be. GMing can be awkward sometimes, but if you're GMing, that should be something comes with the territory. Gonna have to do it. But I've seen GMs online say that if they're running, when they've been running play tests, if they've just gone to the game store with or playing a game via Discord or something with randoms, that they don't have any there isn't a pre-established social contract, they institute that rule of no player can have more than 2 tokens on the action tracker before everybody else has at least gone once, which I think is a good. So adversary actions, when the GM makes a move, usually after a player fails an action or rolls with fear. So the GM can interject and make a move anytime, either when they fail a roll or when they roll with fear. So they can spend one or more tokens from the action tracker to activate that many adversaries. And then when the GM spends a token, they remove it from the action tracker, return it to the token's player. An activated adversary can take most of any action your PC could. Most of the time, they'll do the following: move with close range and make a weapon attack, move within close range and use an adversary action, they'll clear a condition, or sprint far or very far away on the battlefield. Once the GM decides to stop spending action tokens, play returns to the PCs. The GM can spend a fear to place 2 additional tokens on the action tracker and then spend one or both of them on adversary actions, or they can spend 2 tokens to gain a fear. Then they do have an optional tool for turn-based. If your group prefers tactical player structured player turns, you can limit the number of action tokens each PC can use on the action tracker at a time. As recommended to start with 3. Okay, cool. So they've added in basically optional guidance that a GM in a public convention-like setting can say, hey, I'm using turn-based initiative in here. Here's where the optional rule lives in the rule book, so you understand what we're doing. Players act as usual. Each time they make an action roll, they spend an available action token by moving it to the table's action tracker. You still collaborate with other players, passing play around, making moves, telling the story together. Even if you have multiple action tokens, see if another player wants a turn before you spend more than one in a row. I think that should just generally be you take a turn and then you check, hey, does anybody else want to go? Does anybody have an idea that they want to jump in on? I have an idea, but I feel like the option should almost always be given to another player after you spend an action. Once every player's used their available tokens, players refill their character sheet with the same number of tokens as before, then can keep playing. GM makes moves as usual, and the player doesn't place that return token on their character sheet until it's time for the table to replenish their tokens. So basically, everybody has 3 tokens, spend it however, but you can't, even if you get that token back from the GM move, you can't use that token again until everybody else has already spent their 3 action. I actually like that a lot. I don't think I would use it by default. I would want to try raw without the optional rule, but I like it a lot. I think it threads the needle really nicely. Highly recommended for people playing public games, walk-ins, or with randos at a game store, or other convention style play. And I hope it makes sense that y'all what I mean when I say convention play. Oh, here's a new end of the scene. So sometimes certain effects, bonuses, or conditions state they last until the end of the scene. At the GM's discretion, a scene generally continues until the current narrative situation is played out. Chase scene might end when the PCs have caught their quarry or when they've escaped pursuit. A battle scene usually ends when one scene has fled, surrendered, or been entirely dispatched. If there's uncertainty about when a scene is considered over, throw it to the table and see what they think makes sense. You generally don't have to linger in a scene after the most interesting actions and interactions have occurred. If you want to play out their implications or process the emotions, but the heat of the moment has passed, that aftermath and proceeding can take place in its own scene. Cool. Yep. But we already kind of saw where proficiency was. I still haven't seen proficiency described, which is interesting. Here we go. Using weapons. I think it's weird that it's there and not dealing damage, or that these things are separate. I'm not an expert at layout and organization. To me, because I guess we're in the equipment section now and not and maybe it'll make more sense at full layout, where obviously this is some very basic formatting, essentially in a Word doc, with some very simple headings that aren't necessarily easy to keep track of when just scrolling through. So damage proficiency shortened to so proficiency is basically damage proficiency. It's just shortened to proficiency on cards and in the active weapons section of your character sheet. It reflects how skilled you are at wielding a weapon. You start at 1 damage proficiency, then have the opportunity to permanently increase this value up to a maximum of 6 in the course of a campaign. Your damage proficiency generally determines how many damage dice you roll on a successful attack with a weapon, though other abilities or spells may use damage proficiency as well. This value is not weapon specific and doesn't change or reset when you equip a new weapon. Anytime a damage roll denotes the dice type but doesn't tell you the number of dice to roll, i.e. deal D8 physical damage, that means you roll a number of those dice equal to your proficiency. Got it. Makes sense. You basically, if it tells you to roll damage and it doesn't include a number before the dice notation, D8 as an example, if it just says D8, you take the number that's in your proficiency slot and put that before that damage notation. So at the beginning, it starts at 1d8, you roll 1d8. But whenever you hit level 2 and you move your proficiency up, your proficiency number is now 2. If it says D8, you now roll 2d8. Tight. I like that a lot. And we've seen how an ancestry ability that was kind of tied to your proficiency. Like, I think the number of armor slots you got, was that the Kappa? I don't remember. The turtle ancestry. I think that ancestry featured that your armor slot scaled with your proficiency number. So it can be tied to other things. Cool. All this look like, I'll let the real math heads figure out. That's just not my vibe. Okay. And then I think I've kind of hit all the things. I want to look at, okay, so here's the new optional rule for critically success. For deadlier game, you can allow GM rolls to critically succeed whenever you roll a 20 on the D20 during an attack roll. It's an automatic critical success. You succeed at what you set out to do and gain a fear. Making moves, you have GM moves. A GM move is anything you do that guides the story forward. These moves often introduce conflict, reveal new information, or put the PCs in further danger, but they don't have to. Or simply your opportunity to change the scene. The softer and harder move section offer guidance on when your move should introduce danger or difficulty versus when your move should simply nudge the story along. Moves are your chance to make things happen. What should you do? Upcoming section provides suggestions, but these decisions are hard to make in a vacuum. The best tool you have at your disposal is listening to your players as they add to the narrative, weaving your moves in the shared story. I mean, I do think there's a way. I think there is somewhere out there a game system that is narrative and fiction first, narrative focused fiction first, where the GM really is just kind of a human lawyer for determining what and when to roll. And then there's a very predetermined prescribed events that can happen when you fail on something. I guess Daggerheart's just not that, where like the GM just has a lot, like is a player in the sense that they are also there to really like narratively move the story along. And I think I'm having some hard times like jumping over the mental hurdle of like, well, when I run D&D or Pathfinder, like there's a stat block, especially in Pathfinder. Like it's a dungeon. Well, I've got stat blocks for the environment. I've got a stat block for this trap. I've got a stat block for all of the NPCs and opponents. And like, yeah, in role play scenarios, I guess but like when it comes, like you just roll a lot more, you know what you're rolling. DCs are either in 5e really flexible and nobody kind of really argues with you a ton. Pathfinder, there's some very detailed math, specific math that you do to determine what the DC should be, or the stat blocks tell you what it should be. And so you kind of know exactly what's going to happen. This just feels like it's way more loosey-goosey. Would I cause a bridge to collapse just because a player failed a roll? That's not normally how I DM. But maybe I'm boring. Maybe my maps and my environs, my situation should be more dynamic like that. But it's generally not how I've ever operated, really. So maybe I just need to get more flexible. I need to be better. I need to get better to run Daggerheart well. Always consider making a GM move when a PC rolls with fear. Whenever they fail an action roll, whenever they do something that could have consequences, whenever they give you a golden opportunity, and whenever the PC looks to you for what happens next. Your job to look to you for what happens next. Your job is to keep the story moving. So when the players aren't sure what to do, they'll likely look to you for an idea of what happens next. Usually a sign that you should make a move to forward the narrative. For example, if the PCs are conversing with each other during a dinner party, and then they reach a lull in the conversation, they might glance to you to see if it's time for an NPC to speak or take action. So similarly, making a move when the PCs seem to be stumped as to what course of action to take in a scene, or when the players seem frustrated about lack of information, when you need to get the scene moving again, a softer move usually does the trick. See softer or harder moves below. Sometimes a harder move is needed to provoke the PCs to action. How to choose a move. That's a critical success. You get what you want and a little extra. Gain a hope, clear stress, and tell me how this happens, and let the player describe. That's a success with hope. So you get what you want. Gain a hope. Tell me how this happens. That's a success with fear. So you get what you want, but it comes at a cost. Here's what happens. Work together to describe the PC's success. So for the first two, success with hope and a crit success, like GMs are just letting the players kind of decide what happens. Work together to describe the PC's success and introduce a complication or cost, but don't negate their success. Don't negate their success with this consequence. Maybe they face an attack or gain a stress from an from an enemy they're engaged with. They get new information that raises the stakes or realize their allies in an imminent danger. There's a failure. That's a failure with hope. So things don't go to plan, but you gain a hope. Here's what happens. Describe how the PC fails to get what they want and how the situation goes wrong as a result by introducing a minor complication or consequence. Maybe they spot a new danger that they must now contend with, face an attack, or take a stress from an enemy they're engaged with, or face collateral damage that puts them in a more difficult situation. Why is gaining a stress from an enemy they're engaged with both listed under a success with fear and a failure with hope? I feel like there should be, like, it doesn't feel like these two, to me, failing should be a higher consequence than just rolling a fear. Like, failure with hope is listed as like a worse result than a success with fear, but it seemed like other than just the success or failure, the consequences seems the same. Maybe I'm just not getting it. I'm not understanding it very well. Maybe that's how it's supposed to happen. Like, they get what they want and then there's a consequence, or they just don't get what they want and there's a consequence. Failure with fear. So it doesn't go well. Here's what happens. Describe how things go wrong by introducing a major complication or consequence. Maybe the information that they get is not good news and also puts them in immediate danger. They become the focus of multiple adversaries. They're separated from the party, or an important opportunity is lost for good. I still wish there was more guidance around these. I don't know. I'm wrapping my head around the differences of when to roll, because you roll so often in D&D and Pathfinder, the way I play it, that if there was like this opportunity for this major consequence to happen anytime you fail to roll, that's kind of outside of your control. Like, failing with hope and failing with fear, the only difference is something you have no control over, which is what number showed up. Like, what's the difference between your hope and fear dice? So, like, I think I need to adjust when I'm anticipating rolls just not happening as often, especially outside of an action, like a combat with the action tracker. The fact that, like, okay, you get into this serious situation, you're having a serious conversation, and then I need to watch more, or I need to, like, experience more. I'm having trouble. Like, the system seems good at accomplishing what it's trying to accomplish. I'm struggling to understand the difference of some things where, like, a lot of it just feels really impactful in a way that, like, kind of makes me uncomfortable of, like, you failed on this, and therefore this really, like, yeah, it's narratively, and it moves the story forward for sure. Okay, so here's some soft and harder moves. Soft moves are generally easier on the players. They give the party new information about the scene and offer them an opportunity to react. Others are hard moves. They're usually harsher, bigger, or more direct. The fiction happens without the ability to intercede. Okay, following examples span the gradient from soft to hard. Look down the list until you find a move that seems appropriate. Don't describe your move in the terms used in this section. Instead of saying, I show the cost of collateral damage, contextualize it for the players, describing how it comes to be. So, starting from soft, going to hard. Show how the world reacts. Well, that to me just is GMing. That's not a GM move, but I guess everything has to be a GM move. Ask a question and build on the answer. Make an NPC act in accordance with their motive. Lean on the character's goals to drive them to action. Signal an imminent off-screen threat. Reveal an unwelcome truth or unexpected danger. Offer the PC what they want in exchange for marking a stress. Make a move the characters don't see. Force the group to split up. Show the cost of collateral damage. Oof. Okay. Make a character mark a stress as a consequence for their actions. Okay, so that's harder. I would say soft probably stops, force the group to split up. Showing the cost of collateral damage feels just on the edge of hard, right in that middle zone. And then telling them, seems like one of the softest hard moves is to make make them mark a stress as a consequence. End a temporary condition or effect. Make an attack. Gain a fear. So it is harder for the GM to gain a fear to make them mark a stress. Okay, that's good to know, of like at least knowing where these things are on a scale of severity, to know how to measure. Spend action tokens as capture someone or something important. Use a character's backstory against them, or take away an opportunity permanently. Okay, what does lean on the character's goals mean? One of the most powerful things you can do as a GM in a scene is use something personal to the PCs to drive the fiction forward. If they have an NPC they care for, you might reveal something they desperately need or put them in danger. If they're seeking out a specific object or creature, you might reveal where it is and why it's going to be so challenging to get there. Use the PC's own desires to drive them forward is a great way to reinforce why the scene matters to them. Again, like all this, some of this is kind of predicated on running stories that are character driven, as opposed to dropping characters into a storyline that would be happening without them. There's definitely a difference. And some of this does feel, which makes sense, as opposed to be collaborative storytelling. This isn't supposed to be like a world you as the GM walk away and build the entirety of, and then dump a like 50-page lore doc players before session 0. Like, it's supposed to be collaborative, pre-rolling dice in your first session, but it's generally not something I've been good at, if I'm being completely honest. I'm trying to get better at it. Reveal an unwelcome truth or unexpected danger. This is a very versatile move that's usually applicable in any scene. You're simply heightening the drama or tension in a narrative way. Maybe an unexpected person steps out of the shadows, or the characters receive bad news, or information that makes them rethink what they once knew. Soft version of this move might be to have a guard captain emerge to see what her guards are yelling about as you're fighting them, or simply to move a group of dangerous foes into striking range of the party. Harder version of this move might be an enemy pinning a PC against the wall, or tackling to the ground, making a PC restrained until they roll to escape from the adversary's grasp. I think I just realized that my stories are boring. I think Daggerheart really is kind of dependent on these, like, you are hitting, like, this is happening a lot. Anytime you roll, shit like this is happening. It's a lot of moving pieces. Things are moving forward a lot faster. And I mean, I guess the end goal is you're telling a really like an emotional, high, impactful story quicker. Maybe that's the reason why the game only goes to level 10 as opposed to level 20. You're starting at a higher level than like a level 1 or even a level 2 equivalent D&D. Most GM moves, like the most basic ones, show how the world reacts, ask a question, build on the answer, make an NPC act in accordance with their move, is basically how I DM most of my games up until major set pieces. Everything else kind of on the harder end of the scale, big moments, and I generally use those might only have one of those a session. So maybe my games are too slow and too boring. That's what I'm realizing it. Cool. Limb fear. I think all this is, I remember. Setting roll difficulty is fine. I'm not too worried about that. Whenever it seems appropriate, you can give PC advantage or disadvantage. Often a tool you can use to explicitly show a player that the situation is helpful or harmful. I wish I could spend fear to impose disadvantage. Like I wish GMs had a way of spending fear that don't involve necessarily making a move. Like I wish I could just make things more difficult and spend fear. Spending fear. When you spend a fear, you can interrupt PCs during combat, add 2 tokens to the action tracker, use an adversary's fear move, or use an environment's fear move. Spending fear shouldn't undermine the player's fun. Fear is a tool for you to enhance the scene, create dramatic tension, and raise the stakes, not to outright shut down the heroic actions players are taking. I guess if that's the goal, then yeah, being able to spend fear to like give disadvantage, not in there. I think that's all I'm going to cover. I'm 90 minutes into at this point, so makes sense. We got through a lot. I think I probably got most of the basics, or through the main stuff. So I think I'm going to title this video D&D DM has identity crisis reading through Daggerheart 1.4 or something like that, just because I all this seems great. The system is good and is doing its thing well. I just realized I think I need to grow as a storyteller and as a game master to run Daggerheart well the way it is intended to be run. I'm excited to try it. I regret not being able to try it before now, but life gets in the way of things, and it's been a wild 2 months. But at the same time, I know there's a big playtest community. They are getting feedback, and I'm looking forward to giving this a run. It looks like it's in a pretty good spot right now with some, like, we've gone through 2 iterations, 2 updates from the original open beta, and already we're seeing quick responses, things getting a change getting reverted if people didn't like it, and additional balance changes. I still think there's probably some ancestry features that now that they all have 2, some are really great, some are great, and then some are just good or really dependent, mainly fungal. But as far as like the big things, I like the advantage disadvantage change. I like the change to the barge rally feature, even though I think it's a bummer that it's a passive thing, but passive stuff's great. It's incredibly reliable. And then some of the new guidance sections I think has helped me get and understand the system more, and has only made me realize like there's a gap between what I think I'm capable of and what I'm doing now in my D&D games, and the types of storytelling I would want to like. I want to be able to tell stories like Daggerheart enables, and I'm just not comfortable or haven't gotten there yet. Don't have experience doing it, and so I need to grow. Have you run Daggerheart? Do you like the changes made in 1.4 versus 1.3? Or are there things you think they need to continue to change? Or have we gotten to a point where maybe it's small balance tweaks and we're not going to see any like total system changes like the advantage disadvantage system, or evasion getting updated, that kind of thing. Minor thresholds getting changed in 1.3 and now getting adjusted more. Are we looking at small tweaks of existing systems, or is there still big changes to be made? Do you like how development is going? Do you think that we're on the right track, and that you're looking forward to playing and purchasing Daggerheart released version whenever it comes out? Let me know in the comments. Let's talk about it. You can leave a comment down below. If you like this video, hit the like button. If you like this type of content and, shooting the shit with a random GM on the internet, why not subscribe? It's been a big week for me. It's been quiet, and for some reason I've felt like recording videos. So there's more videos than usual hitting the subscription fee, but you could go a month without seeing a video from me. So I'm not going to fill up your feed with a bunch of videos you don't care about. If you got all the way to the end of this video, leave a comment saying, I said ribbit last time. Let's just do ribbit again. If you got to the end of this video, say ribbit so I can know that you got to the end and watched this video and enjoyed it, and there's a little bit of engagement bait. I'm not doing it for the algorithm. I'm just interested to see are people watching this? So thanks for watching. Love you, mean it. Hope you have a good one. Peace.